Our next speaker is Linda Cook, who's a senior attorney with the Ohio Poverty Law Center.
Thank you. Let me just tell you a little bit about my perspective and where I'm coming from in the picture of poverty. I am a senior staff attorney with the Ohio Poverty Law Center, and I've been with that program since 2006. But prior to my joining the staff there, I was a direct services legal services attorney serving poor people in rural southeastern Ohio, and I did that for 18 and a half years. So I saw a lot, very directly, of the faces of poverty and the effects on people living in poverty and the kind of problems legal problems they are plagued with when you're struggling to live in poverty. Now I focus a lot more on trying to systemic change and legislative and administrative advocacy and sometimes systemic litigation or supporting other people's litigation to try to get at the more system changes instead of arguing on a case-by-case basis about how we can help people with the problems of being poor. So I have a few things that I want to say about trying to live in poverty, and the points I want to make are about the high cost of being poor and the exploitation of the poor. Because I'm not sure that we all think about this, but life is way more expensive when you're poor, and it's expensive, as far as the dollars that are coming out of your pocket and what you have to pay for as a percent of your income. But also is very costly to you in time, and the hassles that you have to put up with. And whatever you're trying to accomplish, and the tasks that you need to accomplish to keep your life, sort of on track and in a forward motion. So let's think about that. You pay a higher percentage of your income for housing, transportation, utilities. Probably don't have health care. If you have health care, it's you have very poor coverage, so you're underinsured. And there's a real lack of affordable housing, so you're not going to be, there's a minority who are fortunate enough to get in some kind of a subsidy to assist you with your housing costs. Or if you're trying to maintain home ownership, a home for a family, particularly in rural communities, is an asset not just for your generation, but for future generations. It's very important to maintain that asset. And makes you particularly subject to being victimized by predatory lending, because it is such an important thing. So you got more money going out of your pocket when you're trying to meet the needs that are down here on the bottom of the hierarchy of needs, like food, clothing, and shelter, and that really limits your ability to participate in any meaningful way in the consumer marketplace, which you do have to. I'm a consumer lawyer, and I look at those issues. But so you have severe limitations there, and that's the other kind of poverty that one of your professor on your clip was talking about, the inability to participate meaningfully. And I've done a lot of work trying to combat payday lending, and I hope you all are very familiar with payday lending. We had payday lending reform in Ohio, but hey, it's still here in lots of different forms. And I read a study of the FDIC paper that were looking at the borrowing habits of payday lenders, and they came to this startling conclusion, which, and I say that sarcastically, that all of us who have worked with people who get caught in a cycle of debt with payday lending, we realize it is a debt trap, and the industry argues that people, it's a one-time emergency thing, people use it responsibly, blah blah blah. Well, this paper concluded that no, that actually wasn't the case. That people who frequent payday lending were suffering from persistent liquidity shortfalls. I like that. They're poor and they don't have enough money, so they have to constantly be in this cycle of debt. Okay. And let's think about the graph of the debt to income ratio that we've seen in all of the flat wages, and all of that sort of goes into this mix of not being able to participate meaningfully in the marketplace. So poor people are way more subject to exploitation in subprime lending, and we've seen that in the bubble where lenders thought underwriting was optional, and there was so much money in the market because of things were being packaged up and sold as securities and mortgage-backed securities, and all loans were securities, and that flooded the market with money. So there was a whole lot of money to lend, and the standards were very lax. So, of course, we've sold the one of the American dreams as home ownership, and why wouldn't you want to own a home if you have somebody who's offering you the money to buy a home, and it seems affordable at the time you were making a smart decision for your family. Well, the bubble bursts. You got into a subprime loan that was a very unaffordable loan. Your interest rate increased. You can't afford your payments, and there you are. There are other forms of predatory lending that you're victimized by, as abusive credit cards with high interest rates and high default or overdraft fees and all of that. There are other kinds of predatory lending. I already mentioned one. Payday lending. Look at where payday lending shops are located. And payday lenders are getting very creative about the services that they offer. We now have, although as a consumer lawyer, I never thought this was allowed in Ohio, but guess what? You can do this. Auto title lending, so I think we're going to see way more of that. It's happening now online. There are a couple of lenders that have moved into Ohio and are specifically offering that. Next to a house, a method of transportation, an automobile is the second most valuable asset that a poor family can own. I mean, maybe if you live in, say, Columbus, Ohio, you can have access to a public transportation system. But, Ohio does not have great public transportation. And you cannot live, and you really can't live in rural Ohio without transportation. So you got to have a car. And so you're going to endanger your car to get a loan. And then they're going to have your car title, and they're going to threaten you with all kinds of actions. And it's an in terrorem collection action, because we have your title, we're going to come get your car, you're going to pay this loan, and forget about all your other bills, because you got to pay this loan back to keep your car. So those are a lot of the exploitation that takes place then. And because you have these persistent liquidity shortfalls, and this extremely high debt to income ratio, you have a very poor credit score. And so you're going to be shut out of traditional banking for a number of reasons. You're going to get shut out of banks if you have persistently overdrafted your accounts. So you're in a blacklist, and no banking institution is going to give you a checking or savings account. So what are you going to do, and how are you going to conduct business if you don't have access to banking? Well, you're going to use alternatives like check cashing places, and you're going to pay 5 to 7% of the total of the check that you want to cash, which can add up significantly when as a large percentage of your income, paying to get cash so you can actually get goods. You're going to go to buy here, pay here, auto places, which some of them are very reputable, lots of them are not, and they have very high interest rates, very abusive repossession tactics, and will pursue you for collection. And another rising way that the poverty population is dealing with being outside of traditional banking is using prepaid debit cards. They're the use of the prepaid debit cards is not evenly distributed among the population, and the largest numbers of prepaid card users are members of vulnerable populations, lower income, the unbanked, recent immigrants, consumers in fragile economic situations, and younger, less educated, and less experienced consumers. So we have this product which actually used smartly and appropriately can be an effective tool in managing your finances, but they're very real. I mean, actually, they aren't hardly regulated. So there's a wide variation in what you're going to pay in fees to use the cards, and the penalties that you're going to incur if you don't use them properly. If you are smart and going to, try to check your balance to make sure that you don't overdraw on your card and understand how much money you actually have to spend, then you're going to pay fees of, $1 to $2 every time you want to do a balance check at an ATM. I mean, they're loaded with fees. They can be, and that's another way that they're shut out. So a couple more things that I want to mention. Student loan debt. We all look to education as a avenue out of poverty. Well, and it can be, but trying to finance education is way more burdensome for low-income households. For example, a family living on $36,000 a year or less would have to pay more than 70% of its income to cover college costs after accounting for grant aid. And not surprising, low-income and moderate income students are overrepresented in for-profit schools, and the default rate on student loans for for-profit schools with around 36% in 2009. And about half of the industry's students, the for-profit industry students, are low income, and 37% of them are minorities. So for-profit schools target low income and minorities and veterans because they want to get them into the guaranteed student loan programs. And the horrible thing, and there are lots of valid reasons why lower income students struggle to finish and drop out. Well, you're still obligated to pay your loans, and they are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. They're going to follow you all of your days. There are very limited, reasons why if you could ever discharge them in bankruptcy. And there are some programs that can assist you, but they're very limited. So you're burdened with humongous student loan debt. You're also disproportionately affected by debt collection. One of the most effective debt collection tools ever created was the Fair Credit Reporting Act and the credit scores, because get a judgment against you, park it on your credit score, and then you want to go try to borrow some money to do something, and here's this judgment which you may or may not actually legitimately owe, and you want to improve your credit score, so you're going to try to pay that judgment to get it off your credit, whether it's legitimate or not. And lastly, there is, sadly, even though there's supposedly no debtor's prison in Ohio, there actually is debtor's prison, and it affects people who fail to pay court costs and criminal fines. You're not jailed because you're a criminal. You're jailed because you are summoned to court to explain why you haven't paid and you failed to appear in court. So a bench warrant is issued for your arrest, and you're immediately taken to jail until you can be, called to appear again. So, I know, I'm running out of time, but it's a dangerous world out there. And it's a dangerous and expensive world if you're poor. And Lisa's going to talk more about that, I know. And when it comes to trying to feed your family.
Thank you. Lisa Handler.